Today we're going to discuss the MAHA movement, or the Make America Healthy Again movement. Today I want to talk about what MAHA is, where it came from, what it's accomplished in the 1.5 years that we've now had of Trump 2.0, some of the cultural things that have really stuck around and kind of defined health and wellness discourse in the last 2 years. We'll talk about some of the policies, some of the decision making, and kind of grade MAHA overall. I'm definitely skeptical. There's some parts of this movement that are pretty cool, but objectively, so far, I have some criticisms. Let's get into it. Before we get into any unique and specific critiques of MAHA, let's talk about where it came from. During the run-up to the 2024 election, a lot of voters were deeply dissatisfied with having two options that they felt were kind of old news in Joe Biden and Donald Trump. A lot of third-party candidates threw their hat in the ring, but the only third-party candidate who built any traction was Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He actually built a decent-sized third-party following leading up to the 2024 election. He was a popular independent candidate mostly because of these MAHA promises. Robert focused big time on big ag, pesticides, the big food companies, and big pharma, and promoted a lot of vaccine skepticism, which post-COVID ingratiated him to almost every health and wellness-minded person in America. However, it's hard to win as a third-party candidate in America, so after conceding and saying, hey guys, I don't think I can actually become president, he chose to team up with then candidate Donald Trump, who made a lot of promises to the American people about how he would take that Kennedy agenda, infuse the MAGA agenda with it, and that is where we get the term MAHA, Make America Healthy Again. It is after the alignment of Trump and RFK leading up to the election in 2024, which is kind of why we're talking about all this. Because Donald Trump won, they got the opportunity to enact the MAGA and the MAHA policies, right? They've definitely shifted the culture around how we talk about health and what we talk about to be one of a more MAHA narrative. The MAHA movement is synonymous with a fixation on clean eating and clean foods. And this is perhaps no more prevalent than with their fixation on artificial food dyes. The foods used to basically color things like cereal, ice cream, colors that we don't normally see in food. Now, MAHA has not made any legitimate policy headway on banning food dyes, with the exception of, I believe, one. However, there have been a lot of what we would call handshake agreements between HHS officials, these are people that now work under RFK, to regulate and reduce food dyes in food. So you'll see companies that make ice cream voluntarily using fewer food dyes, but we haven't actually passed any new laws around restricting what food dyes can be used. That was a big promise from MAHA. We're going to ban red this, we're going to ban blue that, we're going to ban yellow this. And a lot of that has not materialized. In fact, most of what we've seen is large corporations that make things like chips, cakes, candy, cereals, and ice creams saying we will make products that do not contain these dyes for consumers. A few examples of this are Naked Mountain Dew, a new dye-free Mountain Dew, and Naked Doritos, both Frito-Lay products that basically are ultra-processed foods, but they don't contain the same artificial food colorings. I do not see that as policy change. I don't see that as making America healthy again. I see that as corporations kind of meeting where we're at in the culture. But that is one thing that the MAHA agenda has delivered, a fixation on food dyes and a few corporate concessions. The second thing the MAHA agenda has delivered culturally, I would say, is a fixation on seed oils. Seed oils are basically, in the Western diet, soybean oil, canola oil, rapeseed oil, sunflower oil. You've heard of all of these oils. They're plant oils that come from seeds. But what seems to be the common opinion around the MAHA group is that seed oils are exceptionally bad and dangerous, and that they should not be consumed by humans. You'll see popular MAHA wellness advocates constantly pushing this narrative that seed oils are dangerous, But the evidence doesn't really show us that. In fact, it shows that when you compare seed oils, which are an unsaturated fat, to a lot of saturated fats, they're basically the same or slightly better. And the best way to remove seed oils from your diet is by eating fewer ultra-processed junk foods. And those are two of the biggest focuses. The thing I agree most with when it comes to MAHA is the elevation of protein. That is one thing that I am definitely down with. As somebody who's been a personal trainer for almost 15 years, I do think the American public is relatively under-muscled, meaning they could use more lean mass. It's helpful for preventing things like diabetes, fracture, all kinds of stuff, but it's hard to build lean mass if you don't resistance train and don't get a good amount of protein. And eating more protein can also help with feeling full, and it could be a good way to push back on the obesity epidemic. So of all the things that have been added to the discourse around nutrition, I really don't see a ton of positives, with the exception of that big focus on protein. Now let's talk about some of the ways the MAGA agenda, Donald Trump's legislative agenda, has affected the MAHA agenda. Let's call that RFK's wish list of things he would like to have gotten done. So the MAGA agenda has actually been pretty tough on public health. The best and most glaring example of this was when Donald Trump betrayed the MAHA movement by signing an executive order that essentially says, hey, glyphosate, Roundup, that pesticide that MAHA people cannot stand, we're gonna buy, supply, and use a lot more of that because it helps with agricultural outputs. And while I am myself am not a glyphosate, sensationalist, I think in the right doses it's safe, for people inside the MAHA movement, this felt like a massive betrayal. Donald Trump also betrayed these voters when he made massive cuts to science investment, huge rollbacks to environmental regulations, huge rollbacks to pollution regulations. These are things that people who are inside this movement, this MAHA movement, whether they are left of center, right of center, they identify as an independent, that's what they care about. As a fitness professional myself, I try to focus on bigger things. I don't focus as much on this small minutia, but I see why it matters. And I do think that these decisions alone have really neutered any efficacy of the MAHA movement. Additionally, we have to consider the cuts to SNAP and Medicaid. A lot of people in this country have a very difficult time having and getting health care, affording an emergency doctor visit if they should need one, and putting food on the table. All of those things make people healthier. I'm a big believer that we probably should not use SNAP funds, these Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program funds for low-income Americans who need food support, to let them buy a bunch of junk food. As a trainer, as a health-focused person, I understand that, hey, there's better foods to buy. But it is Americans have the First Amendment right to buy whatever the fuck they want at the grocery store. And there's some stuff we could do to make these programs better. But cutting Medicaid and cutting SNAP to the tune of billions of dollars has definitely hurt people, and it's made it harder for people to put healthy food on the table and to get the health care they need. Just those two things alone really run antithetical to MAHA. I think one of MAHA's biggest challenges is to actualize the goals of the movement. They need to work within the confines of MAGA itself. And those two things are very antithetical, because while Robert Kennedy is a health-focused person, Donald Trump notoriously is not. And I think Donald Trump was aware that, hey, if I bring this guy in and I make these promises, I can get pretty far. Which brings me to my third point of the video. In closing this section on how MAHA and MAGA have kind of intertwined, it's worth noting that it's very clear that Robert Kennedy at this point, mid-March of 2026, has lost some standing with Donald Trump. He's not doing nearly as much messaging at HHS. Jay Bhattacharya, the head now of HHS CDC, is recommending the measles vaccine for all children in the United States. Essentially, measles outbreaks across many Western states, especially states like Texas. And that is a crisis that the Trump administration and the American public simply cannot afford. And because Robert Kennedy gained so much of his following and fame from vaccine cynicism, this is almost a promise to the MAHA people. They want to see more vaccine cynicism, which is something I don't want, but it is something that many of them want. And Donald Trump politically feels like that is a bad idea. And I would argue that it is. He would know. Look at how hard COVID was for him to navigate in 2020 politically. So he paid the price for this. And I do think it's worth noting that Robert Kennedy's role and how often he is featured keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller as we go through this presidency. And we are seeing him post like weird videos of him as an action figure and stuff, and him with Kid Rock and stuff. But the movement is losing some steam. Time for a little humor. One of the funny things, but it's also kind of deadly, that the MAHA movement has given us is a renewed fixation on raw milk and raw dairy. It was literally the case that RFK was taking raw milk shooters in the White House not that long after the 2024 election. We now have had multiple people get sick from raw milk listeria outbreaks and raw milk bacteria outbreaks because raw milk is very difficult to distribute without having people get sick. You are about 840 times more likely to get sick from the ingestion of raw milk or raw dairy than you are pasteurized dairy. And I won't sit here and tell you that dairy products are unhealthy like so many people. I eat whey protein every single day. I consume milk. I consume Greek yogurt, I consume cottage cheese, I consume kefir. I like those foods because they're nutrient dense and they give my body what I want. But my body does not want a bacterial infection. And raw milk and the fixation on raw milk had almost no legitimate coverage. It was just a fringe thing, a woo-woo thing, until we started seeing it get pushed by the MAHA movement. And while it is kind of funny to watch people fixate and spend a ton of money on getting raw milk that might just give them diarrhea, it is a legitimately more dangerous thing to consume than food dyes and seed oils. So I felt like this kind of deserved its own little snippet. I cannot recommend enough the avoidance of raw dairy if you can get your hands on pasteurized dairy. Something happening right now in real time that I think is very fascinating is MAHA Mama Casey Means, who is extremely popular from doing a lot of podcasts, especially the Joe Rogan podcast, her blog, her social media. She's an influencer. She is currently sitting in a Senate hearing with the goal of becoming the next Surgeon General of the United States. She was Robert Kennedy's direct pick. He wanted her because her brother, Callie Means, is his buddy. He's been helping him, he's been campaigning for him, he works at HHS as a special government employee. He also makes a ton of money due to his adjacency, in my opinion, to the administration. He owns a company that you can use your HSA funds to buy a variety of supplements and wellness products. His sister is going to potentially be the next Surgeon General of the United States. But there's a lot of resistance in the Senate because some of the key senators who got Robert Kennedy appointed, one of whom is Bill Cassidy, is saying absolutely, no way. We trusted you on vaccines, you kind of stabbed us in the back, you're doing exactly what we hoped you would not, and we do not trust your appointment. One thing the MAHA movement has gotten absolutely right is a recommendation on eating whole single ingredient foods. In the MAHA space and in media, many of you probably saw this with the Mike Tyson Super Bowl commercial, they're saying eat real food. And while that seems unbelievably obvious, I do think it is a good starting point. Eating whole single ingredient foods, and when I say single ingredient foods, I literally mean like the ingredient is avocado, or the ingredient is chicken, or the ingredient is carrot, right? Eating foods in their naturally occurring form, you might want to cook your steak, don't eat it raw, but you get my point. More of that is good. We want people eating more single ingredient foods. We want them eating more real food. That doesn't mean junk food is fake. It's fake food. What does that even mean? I can eat it. It's obviously real. It means eat less ultra-processed food and junk food that is hyper-palatable and devoid of nutrition. Let me repeat that. Avoid junk food that is hyper-palatable and devoid of nutrition. Ultra-processed foods like protein shakes, they might exist in a gray area. I think one of the biggest MAHA swing and a misses though is in their focus on protein, they have missed the opportunity to focus on fiber. Do most Americans stand the chance to benefit from more protein? Perhaps. but 90+% of Americans do not eat enough fucking fiber, which is kind of inexcusable when you think about the fact that you can get a full day's amount of fiber relatively quickly by eating tasty foods like fruits, vegetables, and grains. I know that like a lot of people think fiber is only broccoli, but things like apple, berries, carrot, sweet potato, avocado, these are not gross foods. They have a ton of fiber. Beans, grains, they have a ton of fiber. You can even take a fiber supplement, for Christ's sake, like Metamucil, psyllium husk, and get tremendous fiber benefits. If 95% of the country isn't eating enough fiber, we really need to focus on that. And the eat your vegetables messaging has been a little bit absent, I will say, from CDC and HHS as they focus on things like beef tallow, steak, etc. In fact, the guy running the fucking organization, Robert F. Kennedy, is constantly bragging about his carnivore diet, which is an objectively unique diet that probably is not going to help too many American people compared to an equally caloric equated diet that also includes fruits and vegetables. Let's wrap up this MAHA analysis. I have to be honest, after 16 months, I'm pretty disappointed. I was never a fan of RFK's health messaging, but I love that he lifts, I love that he works out, and I love that he takes an active approach to fitness. I disagree with him on a great many things, especially things like vaccines, his opinion about the carnivore diet, some of the things he says about antidepressants, but I had at least some hope that we might, as many people say, shake things up. I have been pretty disappointed with the contributions of the MAHA movement. Most of them seem very surface, ineffectual, and frankly like handshake agreements with corporations with a whole lot of brouhaha, funny videos, and raw milk shooters. But the MAGA agenda that came with it, very disappointing. In my opinion, very bad for the health of the American people and the health of the environment. And whether you want to admit it or not, if you were a MAHA voter, you were a Trump voter in 2024. I do not know how many of these MAHA voters will vote Republican in 26 and 28 if they vote at all, but I would say after analyzing the movement's ability to make progress on improving our health in about half of Trump's term, I would give it like a D, D-. The grade has been pretty darn stinky. But I'm not going to leave you guys here without ideas. Here's what we could do to actually make America healthy again immediately. We could rescind those cuts to Medicaid and SNAP, making sure that the poorest Americans do not lose their access to life-saving healthcare and food. I'm totally cool with reworking SNAP so people can eat more fresh fruits and vegetables and trying to minimize how much is spent on ultra-processed junk. I can't imagine why we don't have more affordable healthcare in the richest country on earth. That should be fixed immediately. That would make people's health much better. Something we could do that would immediately make us healthier is invest in more walkable infrastructure to redesign our entire world, or at least our country, around walking more. America is such a car culture. 5-lane freeways, strip malls, shit like that makes absolutely nobody fucking healthy. We need more walkable spaces, and we need safe spaces to walk. We also need to take care of our environment better because our environment is our soil, it's the water we drink, it's the air we breathe, and we've already done a historically pretty bad job of this, and Donald Trump is the king of kind of drill baby drill, cut back the regulations so we can build more and pollute more, and it could shake up to look pretty bad long term. I'm positive that we need to do more to care for our environment. If you guys like this video and this kind of brief breakdown of the health and wellness side of policy, culture, etc., be sure to follow the channel, follow me on Instagram, follow me on my podcast where I try to engage in more meaningful wellness, deep kind of toned wellness content like this. It might not be for everybody, it might seem a little political, but that's where we're at. I hope you enjoyed. Be sure to like, be sure to share, be sure to comment, and I'll catch you on the next video.